Steve, former player, former coach, former St. Cloud leading scorer of all time. I think we're going to cover a little bit of everything today. Welcome to the show, Steve.
I'm still coaching though. I'm coaching again now, so
Are you still in Georgia?
I'm not. Yeah, I won't be retiring anytime soon.
Okay, all right. And you're with the Rock Lobsters.
Yeah, Athens Rock Lobsters.
How's that going out there? Is hockey catching on?
It's pretty good. We've had really good crowds, and it's a great town. One of our players we loaned to South Carolina, so his first opportunity in the coast. So I think we're 14-3-2. So we've had a pretty good start. We played
Oh, that's fantastic. I saw the advertisement says it brings fights and hockey. So do you have a tough team?
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be hockey, and I have a line that I've had the same team for 25 years. It's just the names have changed. So we still have some guys that are hard to play against. We have a lot of offense, a lot of skill, but we've also got some guys that are, they're nasty guys to play against, and they hit and scrap a little bit, and it's entertaining.
Old time hockey, which is what the NHL is missing, and they don't understand that right now. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Tell us a little bit about playing college hockey. I've watched an interview where you said you were the all-time leading scorer over at St. Cloud State. You were born in Minnesota. So I'm guessing you were born into the hockey world at a young age.
Yeah, where I'm from, Minnetonka, they've won the state high school championship a few times over the last couple of years. But, we have a big lake, Lake Minnetonka. So we grow up, you're skating outdoors. And back in those days, you'd fall through the ice and, you have to walk home. And in Minnesota, if you're walking home after falling through the ice, we didn't have cell phones. And, by the time you get home, you'd be like an ice cube. So, but I used to play outdoors every day, every day after school, all day on the weekends. It's the perfect weather, at least it was, for being a hockey player in Minnesota.
Who was the guy that got you into the hockey? Who was the first person you looked up to in hockey?
My dad didn't play hockey, played basketball. But he signed us up for every sport. So we played everything. He built a basketball, made a cement court in our backyard, and then he flooded in the wintertime, and we started skating on it. And he signed me up. I was I think 5 or 6 years old, and signed me up on my brother's team. So I played on that team for about a half a year. Then the coach, I had to move down to my own age. The coach didn't want me to move down, but I ended up playing with kids my own age, and I had a lot of fun growing up in Minnesota.
That's awesome. It's a different world out there. It's as close to Canada as you can get as far as being. Well, I would say Minnesota and Maine are the two states that produced the most hockey players for the United States back in the day. Now it's become a little bit more spread out. I always laugh because growing up in Jersey, we didn't have a rink within an hour as a kid, and now I'm seeing all these kids coming out of the New Jersey programs and turning pro. Who was the first player that you idolized as a kid?
Probably going back, I really liked Bobby Orr. I liked the Bruins, and then I liked Terry O'Reilly. He was probably. I like Bobby Nystrom. I like the physical guys that were good players, the physical players. I like Jack Carlson from the Stars, and I kind of had that mode, growing up, and fun to watch. I mean, back then that was the only time I would stay home on Sunday afternoon. I would come home to watch the NHL would play Sunday afternoon, and they didn't have as many teams then. So I remember seeing Bobby Orr and Bobby Hull and those guys play back in the day. But
the old NBC game of the week. Taz, that's a hell of a guy to look up to. You talk about a guy who can play the game but also knock your head off with a left hand. I grew up in a great area. I tell this story to everybody. I grew up in Jersey, and we got the Bruins, the Whalers, the Rangers, the Islanders, Flyers, and Atlanta Flames, all for free on cable back in the day. So Saturday afternoon was sitting in front of the TV and watching Boston on WSBK, and then Sunday was the NHL game of the week, and the rest of the time was the New York Rangers, who unfortunately were never tough enough. I'll get into that with you later also.
When I would drive to New Jersey,
what was the first jersey you owned?
Oh, I think it was a Stars jersey. I remember, I don't know how I got it, but we went to we took a bus to a Stars game when I was playing at St. Cloud, and I was with a bunch of my football player buddies, and we got a huge fight up in the stands, and some guy started it with us, actually, which wasn't probably a very good idea, but that was I think one of my first Stars games. was actually fighting in the stands, which is kind of funny. I guess when I look back at it.
I cut you off. You were going to tell a New Jersey story.
Oh no, just driving through New Jersey is a lot like Minnesota. I remember when I was with the Rangers years ago, and I remember driving through New Jersey, and I'm like, this scenery seems a lot like Minnesota, just not as many trees.
Well, now I saw that you played with the New Haven Nighthawks for a couple games. Was that under Ranger contract or with the LA Kings, or were you an independent?
So it was with the Rangers, and the Rangers also, they were splitting a farm team in Salt Lake City, where our coach from the year before, I was with the Rangers when we won the Central League with the Tulsa Oilers, and then we were splitting a farm team in the American League with LA. And Nick Beverly was the coach there, and I didn't really like it too much. I didn't like the way he was treating me. And Tom Webster had been calling me about coming out to Salt Lake City and playing. And so he had moved me back to defense one day in practice, and I had played a little bit of defense in the Central League, but I remember throwing my stick into the stands and just saying, fuck off. I guess I probably can't say that on this side.
No, you can say anything you want.
Like, hey. And I left, and I just took my stuff off and drove out to Salt Lake City, and because I knew they'd already told me I could go out there. Playing on a team where they're affiliated, it was an LA coach, and I called him Bev Nickerson. I don't think he liked that too much, but that was my nickname for him. But I ended up going out to Utah and playing for Webster, and then he traded me to Toledo later in the season. So it was I did a lot of driving that year.
You played on this Tulsa Oiler team with this is one hell of a tough team. If looking at the penalty minutes of the players here, you had Cam Connor, George McPhee, yourself, Rick Sartor for a little bit, Jim Levins for a little bit. You had some guys on there that weren't afraid to throw down. You got any good George McPhee stories? I absolutely love George.
I got a million McPhee stories.
All right. But knock me out.
I used to call him Little Big Man. And, George, he's got a mean streak when we played. I remember one time he got a guy right between the eyes with a stick, Kevin Kerr. I think it was Kevin Kerr. Alan Kerr with the Islanders.
Alan Kerr,
I asked George, I said, geez, George, when we got to the bench, I said, what did he do to you? And he looks at me and he goes, nothing. He was just, he hit Eddie Kia when Eddie Kia had the brain damage, and George was so tough. I mean, he's maybe the toughest guy. He only weighed 175 pounds, and he was fearless. That's what I called him, Little Big Man, from that movie.
So George McPhee, when he got to the Rangers, was a legend instantly. He busted Dave Langevin so bad behind the net in Madison Square Garden. Langevin just holding his head and blood is spurting all over the place. And my friends and I are teenagers, and we just hate the Islanders with a passion. Fuck those guys even till today. And George just became George the Animal McPhee. That's what we used to call him, over George the Animal Steele, the wrestler. And George used to date a lot of models when he was playing with New York. And my family had a restaurant in Edgewater, New Jersey, and George used to come in, and he would see me working, and he would just roll his eyes because he knew I'd walk over to the table and just be like, George, oh my God, what you did to Laundry, and oh my God, what you did to this one. And the girl at the table would be like, what do you mean? What did George do? And he would never tell anybody he scrapped. He would always tell everybody he was a hockey player for the New York Rangers, but he never mentioned that he was, a guy who got involved or anything like that. And he was always just a funny guy. Give me another story about George, because we don't have. I have some footage. I have about. Let me tell you how I got into hockey. I have about 6,000 hours of video. I have anything that was ever produced from 1970 to 2021. I have on DVD, and I was trained and broken into that hobby by Sandy Vigilante, who's the godfather of hockey fights. Sandy's my mentor, my idol.
He used to ask me to send him videos of our team. So I mean, I'm sure you've got some stuff there that I gave to Sandy over the years. But I mean, George was he was obviously he was really tough, and but he was a smart guy, and he came in. I think his brother was a pretty tough guy too. But the one thing that with George is, he could turn on. He had a mean streak, and in hockey, it's okay. I would tell kids growing up, and hey, you can't be a bully in the playground, but when you're playing a game in a pro sport game, you can use whatever you have to your advantage. But we had I'm trying to think of the guy's name. We were at a Rangers camp in the summertime, and it'll come to me. The guy was really tough. He'd been kicked out of the OHL he punched the referee and knocked him out, and he was playing, and we all met at the camp and training, and then George picked a fight with him during the season when we were playing in Tulsa. And I asked George afterwards, I said, why did you, because we were all kind of friends, and he goes, I just want to see if I could beat him. And I mean, he was, for a Hobey Baker warrior, he's got to be the toughest Hobey Baker winner ever in the history of college hockey. But yeah, pound for pound, he's as tough as there is.
I think Jay Caulfield ruined what could have been one of the greatest fights ever in Philadelphia. Dave Brown, George McPhee off the face-off. Brown lands 2 bombs. George doesn't flinch. Starts to throw back at Brown, and Jay Caulfield dives in and takes down Dave Brown and gets the third man in and doesn't let that fight finish. If you watch the fight, Brown nails George twice, and George doesn't even move. And you see Brown's face when he gets tagged by George with the first left. His eyes kind of go back like, who the fuck is this guy? And they throw another one, and then and Caulfield dives in. I'm sure he had best interests out for George.
He's way tough. I mean, he's way tougher than Caulfield. I mean, he's half the size, but and Brown, I fought Brown when I had a nerve damage in my right side, and I wasn't really 100%. I didn't realize until later that I'd had surgery on my neck, and I had some nerve problems I had some nerve damage. It took a while for my right arm to come back. And Brown punches as hard as anybody in pro hockey. So, he's a tough. I do remember that fight. I remember the Bobby Nystrom fight with George because back then,
Nystrom headbutted him
because he was kind of one of the first guys from the Oilers from that team to move up and make it to the NHL. Van Biesbroek was on it. And, we stayed in touch over the years. We still stay in touch.
Great guy. I ran into him at the draft here in Nashville 2 years ago when he was walking down the street to go to the arena. And I came up behind him and I go, George the Animal. And he looked back and he rolled his eyes and he goes, oh, it's fucking you. And then he looked at me and he goes, oh, you're a lot bigger. And I started laughing. Great guy. He always took care of us as kids. I always tell the story. We used to cut school because the Rangers would drive into the Meadowlands and we would wait in the parking lot and get autographs. And George McPhee and Phil Esposito and Ron Greshner, just always great to the fans. Barry Beck once beat the shit out of Pat Verbeek because Verbeek had his thumb cut off in a farming accident. And as kids, one of my friends wrapped a rubber thumb and put it in a jewelry box and gave it to Pat for Christmas. And when he was walking in, he opened it as a gift and he saw it was a rubber thumb and he turned around and he charged at my friends and I. And he's like, you little fucks, you think that's funny? And Barry Beck jumped in and was just like, shut the fuck up. And first shift of the game, Beck runs him and just throws his gloves off and pummels him in a preseason game. And we were just like, holy shit, Pat Verbeek just took a beating because of me and my friends. So we always appreciated tough guys in New York. And it's a shame going back even to the 84 season when you were with New Haven and stuff. They just always had one guy, it seemed like, the Rangers. They never had that toughness that was the Flyers and the Islanders having multiple guys. And always fell on Nick Fotiu. Then it became George for a little while. And they just never had that extra person, so to say, which it was always a shame. Even today, the Rangers are just a bunch of fucks. They treat this kid Rempe like he's got leprosy and won't let the kid play. Then he plays and they win. They're 6-0 in the playoffs, and they take the guy out of the lineup, and then they end up losing series. Do you see the lack of...
The thing about Rempe is he can skate and hit. He's got to learn to not hit where he gets suspended. Nowadays, what I tell my guys is everything is on video. Back in our day, you could do things and get away with it. You're not getting away with anything now. So you just got to learn how to hit.
Oh, unless your name is Sam Bennett.
Huh?
Unless your name is Sam Bennett. Do you see what Bennett did again last night with the...
No, I didn't see what he did, but I know Bennett does a lot of stuff.
He puts the butt end of his stick in his right hand. He comes in with his left and rubs the guy out, and as they're against the glass, he sucker punches the guy with the butt end of his stick. He's done it twice and nothing. He's taken the same hit that Rempe took and got suspended 8 games for. He delivered that same hit the week before and didn't even get a penalty. So I just always have a problem with the NHL justice systems. Just seems to be like it's pick and choose who their targets are.
Well, that's nothing new. You know what I mean? That one of the things that I look at too with teams is, you got to have people on your team that are willing to go back and push back. And nowadays, those guys are, if you can skate and hit and scrap a little bit, you're still really valuable because, you have to have guys that, what is it? Who cares if somebody runs your best player and he injures him and the guy gets a couple of games suspension and your best player's out a month? What does that do? You still have to have people around that are willing to send a message back and keep things honest because, it's just too easy to hurt players, with the speed of the game. So I'm still a believer that there's just every year because of junior and with, the issues with concussions, the junior, guys are only allowed to fight 10 times a year. So, you don't have as many guys. Most parents kind of steer their kids away from fighting. And so, there's less and less players willing to do it. And less players that actually can do it because now like I said, if you come out of junior and you haven't fought very much, you can't go against an American League tough guy like Jacob Doty or, some of these guys in the NHL. They'll kill you. So even if you're a really tough guy, you have to fight to kind of learn how to do it. It's not something where you can just train, be really good at it. You've got to learn how to take a punch and, learn how to give a punch. And nowadays, and I think the way the players fight now is really stupid. I think they should watch some of the old guys and watch the way they tie up. And, like Ben Wilson was a master. He talked about he got his grip. And, if you watch him, he fights the start the same way. Cam Connor taught me that years ago. He's like, hey, I'm going to tie the guy up. And if I don't have him down in 3 punches, I'm going to throw him down. And because Cam didn't want to get hurt. He's like, I don't want to get hit. I'm 30 years old. I don't want to get hit. And if you fight a lot, you're going to get hit a lot. It's just, because you're fighting other tough guys. So you got to be careful. You got to tie guys up where it becomes a strategy where you're getting loose. And nowadays they just grab in the front of the jersey. They go 5 fights without hitting each other. But you can still get hurt getting hit behind. I mean, some people don't get hurt getting hit in the head because, just have a harder, thicker skull. But normal people, you can still get hurt getting hit, in the underneath your ear. And I just think it's a dumb way to fight.
Right. What was your first fight coming out of college that you can remember? What was it? Something that just came naturally.
I got a little bit of a funny story on that. I had 3 days of meal money when I went to Minnesota's camp. I got invited to the North Stars camp out of St. Cloud, and I had led the nation in scoring for Division II. It was Division II back then. So I had 32 goals as a junior, so they were watching me. They didn't have any idea I could fight, but I'd bounced in a bar, and I'd probably been in 25 street fights at least before I turned pro in hockey. So I knew I could fight. I just didn't have a lot of hockey fights. But I played when I was 17. They had a league in Golden Valley that all the WHA guys played in. The Carlson brothers, all those guys played in a summer league. We actually had 5-minute majors in a summer league in Minnesota, which is really unheard of in the U.S. So I kind of learned a little bit there. But my first fight was Archie Henderson. I got field money for training camp, and all the University of Minnesota guys, they all had 7 days. And, I was talking to my buddies up at the bar where I worked at St. Cloud, and I'm like, okay, I got to fight either Jack Carlson, this Nelson Burton guy, or Archie Henderson, so people noticed me. So I picked a fight with Archie the first day of camp, and then they gave me meal money. That Glenn Sommore came and talked to me, and they kept me around for the rest of the camp. So it's a lot easier to get you noticed if you're a fighter, if you go get in a fight, than if you're a goal scorer and you got to wait till you score.
Right. How'd that fight go with Archie? He was a big guy.
It was good. I mean, I hit him with some good ones, and back then I was like 210, and I was benching like 340, and I was pretty strong. And I looked at him and I said, he's just this tall, skinny guy. And but Archie was a pretty good fighter, and and a tough guy. And so he kind of told me when I went to the IHL, he said, hey, listen, he goes, go down there and fight every game until Christmas, and then nobody will cover you. And I ended up, the only guy on the team that had more points for me when I got hurt was Dirk Graham, and he ended up having a pretty good career in the NHL. And I had like 30 points in 30 games, and Graham had 33. But I was leading the league in fights, and then I broke my kneecap, and then I broke my shoulder. It was a tough start, but back in those days, that league was crazy.
Oh, the IHL was nuts. I'm looking at your stats. You played 35 games. You had 30 points and 128 minutes of penalties. I mean, you were putting up some numbers down there for sure.
Yeah, my center was Scotty Housen, who ended up leading the league in scoring. I think he led the league as a rookie, but he ended up with 124 points. We had a really good team and a tough team, and I lived with Paul Tanardini and his wife, and I think Paul was he's the all-time leader in the IHL in penalty minutes, and he was one of the first guys that, he committed suicide when he was like 52, and I'm sure he had CTE. He played years without a helmet. Kind of a sad story, but he was a great guy and kind of took me under his wing, and I thought he was crazy at the time, and then I started doing some of the stuff that, anyway, it was a crazy time back then. They didn't really have videotape. So if you got away with something in the game, you got away with it. And it was a tough league back in those days.
That's when guys had really long memories. That's when payback was a bitch back in those days.
Yeah, that's where I got 2 eyes for an eye.
Yeah. So you mentioned a gentleman who's such an interesting character, another great guy and legend of hockey, Cam Connor. Cam grew up with Roddy Piper. He has some great street fight stories of going toe-to-toe with Piper and other guys and them challenging 10 guys. And you got any good Cam Connor stories?
Well, Cam was the one, he's the one that talked to me about the strategy of, about tying guys. Because back in those days, it was kind of grab by the front of the jersey and just, outswing the guy. And like I said, if you fight a lot, then you're fighting the other team's tough guys. It's just a matter of time before. Like I had a guy, Josh Bratton, when I was coaching, and I told Josh, I said, "Hey, Josh, you're tough enough to make it to the NHL, but you don't want to be, you don't want to take too many punches before you get there." And Josh never changed. I tried to get him to learn to tie guys up.
And he was wide open.
Style. But anyway, Cam was at the time he was like 30 years old, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't want to get hit, but and I still pass this strategy on to guys now is, if you tie the guy up, and Cam's strategy was, if I get you tied up, the worst that's going to happen is going to be a tie. The fight's going to be a tie, and I'm not going to get hurt, but I'm going to still try to hurt you." And, he didn't fight too much back in those days. He only had a couple of scraps, but because we had a lot of, we had younger guys. And that league, there was only 5 teams in the league, so you fight the same guys. If you're fighting, you basically fight the same guys every game.
You bounced around a little bit. You went into New Haven for a couple games. You end up in Hershey, probably one of the greatest AHL cities ever. Probably a great city to play in. I've never played in professional sports, but for everybody who talks about says Hershey was a destination city if you were going to play in the A. What was it like going to an original franchise like that, playing in the Hershey building for that organization?
Well, so my wife was Frank Mather's step-granddaughter. So he's my first meeting with Frank. I was in the gym working out, and he knew about me. And so he came in, and he brought up this guy, Bennett Wolf. Bennett Wolf had apparently terrorized the team the year before, and he played in Baltimore. And he says to me, he tells me some story of something that Bennett did to somebody. And he asked me what I would thought of that. And I looked at him, I said, "Hey, some players, the only thing they understand is you got to ball up your fist and hit them as hard as you can." And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, that's the answer I was looking for." And so we had a great relationship over the years. We had a really tough team. And back in those days, it would take 15 minutes. Us and Adirondack were the top teams in the league. They didn't have a very tough team. They had Probert, though. But, if you would get an empty net goal, it would literally take 15 minutes to play the last one of the game. And we led the league. I think we still maybe had the record of penalty minutes from the American League that year. So everybody would get geared up for us. So it was like every night there was something going on. And back then, Archie was in the league. I know Shane
Baruby.
Val James, McRae, a lot of tough guys in the league back then. And yeah, it was
You had 432 minutes in penalties that season. 2 games in 1 period you actually sat out in penalties. Do you have any memorable scraps? Any rivals down there? Anybody you would say was kind of like your?
Well, Jay Miller and I, we had some fights in the IHL, and then we had a few fights in that league, and he was the guy that I just didn't like. I got a suspension. I speared him, and I was playing with a broken hand, and I didn't like the way I thought he jumped me in a fight in the playoffs, and I speared him. So.
Now, interesting point.
What's that?
I said interesting point. You just led me to something I was going to ask you. I've spoken to a couple people off the show, not on. Nobody's really gone on. A couple guys have gone off on people and said they didn't like people. I think, personally, I've watched Jay Miller, hundreds of fights he's had. I think Jay jumps a lot of people. Jay likes to get that first one in where he kind of turns, his gloves already off, and he's throwing that first left before you even know you're in a fight.
Yeah, well, that's what he did. So I shaved now. My buddy Tanner Dini, he had a guy eye gouge him in a fight. He eye gouged him so bad that Tanner had to get stitches. And the guy was in his wedding party, and they played together. And Tanner shaved his stick down. Remember, we had wooden blades then. So right. Tanner shaved his stick down and speared him in the face and cut him open. And I probably shouldn't say it, but my blade was like a razor. And I speared him, and I caught him right in the helmet because he saw me coming and turned his head at the last minute. But yeah, so every time that, there's a few guys, but most in the American League back then, we played a lot of teams. So you didn't play as many teams, like they do now to travel. But it was first straight or St. Catharines. I fought Val James a few times.
I was going to ask you about Val. A lot of people say Val could have been one of the most dominant guys in the NHL. He just never really got a full-time chance. Well, what do you think of Val as a fighter? I mean, he's legendary for breaking the barrier, and I've read his book. It's a tremendous book, and what he went through to get in the league. But as far as being tough, where do you rate him?
Yeah, he was pretty tough. I mean, there was one when I was hurt in Hershey in the playoffs, him and Stuthers fought 11 times in 7 games. And,
yeah.
I mean, Stuthers, he was burnt out by the time we got to the next series because, but Val didn't play very much. Stuthers played a regular shift and was one of the top defensemen. But, Brophy would have Val on the end of the bench. I remember I beat up somebody in front of their bench. And Brophy comes up behind him. If anybody is listening to this that knows John Brophy, he's got the white hair and the bangs. And I'm in the penalty box, and the penalty box at St. Catharines was right by their bench. And he's standing behind Val, and he's smiling, and he's pointing at Dave. He's like, "Hey, Martinson, guess who you're fighting next?" And he's pointing at Val. So the next time I'm on the ice, Val comes at me, and I cross-check him right in the face, knock him down, and I hit him. And he's like, "Hey, what are you doing? Relax." And I'm like, "Well, I thought you were coming at me because, your coach has been threatening." But he was just like, "Hey, man, just relax. I wasn't going to do anything." So he was a straight up honest guy. Trying to think of, really in that league, because the one thing I'm taking to the grave with me is I have the record for most fights in that league. And I think I had 49 major penalties, and I had 44 fighting majors. And back then you could run the goalie and only get a major penalty. So you wouldn't get thrown out of the game. So I think I had 5 majors for hitting the goalies, which that was kind of my favorite thing to do back in the day. The one time I ran the goalie from Rochester a couple of times. And the next time we played him, they called up this Andy Ristow from and Wayne Van Dorp. So Van Boxmer, I became friends with Van Boxmer later when I got into coaching. But Boxy was a character behind the bench. But anyway, it was a fun year in Hershey. We had a lot of good guys on that team, and we lost in the finals. That was tough. We lost in the finals to Adirondack.
So Brian Curran was on the show and told me the person he disliked most ever was Chris Nyland. He thought Chris was cheap. Tom Laidlaw mentioned Ben Wilson. Tom Laidlaw did not like Ben Wilson, said that he was a character, chose his spots. Um, did you ever have, like you said, Jay was a guy that was somebody you fought a lot, but was there anybody that you just had a personal dislike for, like you just didn't like the guy at
Lyndon
all?
Byers. So,
Okay.
I mean, if I could have killed Lyndon in the fight, I would have. I mean, I shouldn't say it like that, but I would. And then I met him later, and he's a great guy. He's a nice guy, you know what I mean? But, you know, Lyndon would always be yapping in the penalty box, so I probably had the most fights with him I mean, I wasn't in the NHL very long, so, you know, I had to try to make the best of it, but it was always the Bruins with me and the rest of the guys that I fought in the NHL were really just, you know, Ben Wilson. I mean, everybody knew that Ben was tough. You know, Ben would, if you knew anything about him, he was going to try to hurt you if he could. And not growing up, when I was playing pro, I would hear stories about him and his brother terrorizing guys in summer hockey. And so I knew he was a mean, you know, I wanted to fight him because he speared one of the guys in Detroit in a game that I was watching. And so, but yeah, I mean, probably Lyndon Byard was the guy that, you know, I would have fought him every shift that we pretty much fought every time we got on the ice against each other.
Okay. What did you say to Sean Antosky to get him that pissed off that he ran across in the eye and jumped in the penalty box after you?
Oh, I told him, well, so the week, I think it was like a couple weeks before that, we had a fight in San Diego, and I was just pounding him. And we fell down, and he fell down first, and I went down too, and then he stepped on my hand and cut my hand open. And so I had to go off the ice. So he came to hit me in the corner, and I speared him. And so that's, if you watch it, he's laying on the ice. So yes. I asked him, I said, so how many times did I hit you in San Diego? I said, your head's so big. It's so easy. You're so easy to hit because your head's so big. And then I asked him, I said, did you kill your mom when you were born? Did your mom survive? You know, anyway, so I hit him with a water bottle is what happened. I threw a water bottle at him. And then, you know, the referee grabbed my arm, I was going to hit him with my stick. You know, he's a big guy coming. He's like 6'4", 240. Yeah. And so I went to grab my stick when I saw him come up, and the referee grabbed my arm, so he kind of got the jump on me to start.
I always ask this question because, you know, it's truth and it took place, but there was a Buffalo Sabre, I don't ever mention his name, who did an interview once. He went on to have a pretty good NHL career as a tough guy, about how he discovered testosterone. At the time, it was legal. It was right a year or two before steroids were banned. But you also see in that late 80s where a bunch of guys just all of a sudden are bodybuilders on skates. And Antosky always appeared to be one of those guys to me where he just kind of wasn't the normal-looking tough guy. Like, he was one of those guys that all of a sudden started looking like Dolph Lundgren or Ivan Drago.
There's a lot of guys
on skates.
So you would see guys in the summertime come back. They would they come back from one summer off and be 20 pounds heavier, you know, or 20, 25 pounds heavier. And you could see it in the face. And I have no issue with that. And the reason I say it is because, like, I'll give you an example. I'm working out in the gym in Montreal, and Shane Corson is teasing me. He's like, Marty, I'm almost as strong as you. I don't even lift weights. And I'm like, yeah, well, Shane, that's why you're a first-round pick. A lot of these guys, you know, when you get to the NFL or the NHL, I mean, some of these guys, Stephane Richer was built like a brick shithouse, had like a 28-inch waist. They didn't even lift weights. You know what I mean? They didn't even have to really watch what they eat. And then you got guys like Chelios who, you know, Chelly could have a few beers and you know, have a couple of beers till 3, 4 in the morning, sleep 2-3 hours, and get up and run 5 miles. You know what I mean?
They talk about him in the sauna, putting the bike in the sauna everywhere he played.
His work ethic was, I never seen anybody like him. And so a lot of these guys, so you look at the tough guys, how did it start out? It started out because good players like Terry O'Reilly were beating up other good players. and they were good players. So if you can't get a good player to play against them, you get a guy that can play against them. You know what I mean? And so a lot of these, so it isn't the other thing with Canada. So if you're a good athlete in Canada, you get funneled to hockey. And so you get these Canadian guys where if they were in the U.S., they might be football players because they're 6'5",
right.
40. They're just naturally like that. There's, you know what I mean? When you get to that level, there's a lot of guys that are just naturally, they don't have to do anything. They call it a gift from God, but I would always say it's a gift from your parents.
Right.
So, you know, the problem with steroids in hockey is if you only want to be a fighter, you can go on steroids. They'll make you more aggressive. They'll make you bigger, but you can't skate. It's really hard to put on weight and skate. In football, you could, because I knew guys in college that were on steroids. You know, football players could put on 20 pounds and still be fast and be able to run faster. In hockey, there's a fine line of what weight you can carry above your natural weight. Like I could carry 210 at the beginning of the season because I would do a lot of leg lifts. But by the end of the year, I would be down to maybe 200 or 202 just because I had to build it all up, you know, in the summertime. And I would lift weights after games and stuff. But I didn't want to be one of those guys that went up to 225 because I knew I couldn't play. And I like playing hockey. I like to fight. But if I wanted to just be a fighter, then I would have just been a fighter and not played hockey.
Right. It was just interesting to me because I asked Ben Wilson the same story, and Ben basically said, you know, he knew when it was time to get out of the league because he saw guys, and he named Probert by name, he said he was going to get killed. He's like, all of a sudden these guys came up and they were so much bigger and stronger and physically stronger than him that with his career and his back and everything he was going through, he's like, I knew it was time to step out. He was afraid that he was going to get hurt. You mentioned you played against a young Probert in Adirondack. You have any Bob stories? You have any run-ins with Bob?
I dropped him the first time. I hit him. He wasn't really ready, so we just got roughings. And then the next fight, the first fight I got in with him, though, he did a trick. He grabbed me by my waist and my shoulder and spun me around. And then he got me with like 3 or 4 good shots. And I'd never had anybody do that. He literally, one shoulder on my, one grab on my shoulder and my hip, and he spun me around and I was looking the other way, and then he started hitting me from behind. And so the next time I fought him, he tried to do it again. I'm like, I grabbed on now, you know, because I knew Probie. So I played with Probie. And I told him, I said, hey, when you went to the All-Star game, I said, Probie, don't take your shirt off until everybody takes a shower. They're going to go back and tell their tough guys, you know, that you're really just a big, you know, wimp. Because Probie didn't lift weights.
Right.
If you see him in his fights now, he's a strong guy, but he's like the farm boy strong. And there's guys like him that he's just got unbelievable endurance. And it's one of those things that as coaching, I didn't notice as much as when I played, but there are some players that they can go hard for a minute, come back to the bench, and 45 seconds later, they're recovered and go again. And it isn't just their training. It's their physiological makeup. They just have that gift. And Probie had that ability to fight a long time. And if you watch him in his heyday, he would let guys kind of tire themselves out.
Yeah.
He had long arms. He would kind of lock both his arms out. And then he would just decide which hand he was going to come with. But yeah, he was. He's a really good guy. It's too bad that, you know, his life ended prematurely.
You can see over my shoulder, I got him and Ty dual signed, and there's a funny story to that photo. When I got Bob to sign it, was outside a hotel in New Jersey. Again, mid-teens for me. And go out. It's freezing cold, and we're waiting outside. And a friend of mine sees Bob, and he just walks right past us. He doesn't say a word. Wouldn't acknowledge our existence. And my buddy goes to chase him and says, Bob, please. And he doesn't see there's a curb coming up. He misses the curb, falls into the Red Wing bus, smashes his face on the stair, gets up completely embarrassed. And Eiserman's like, Bob, get the fuck up and sign the picture for this kid. He just broke his face in half. And he came out and he signed for us. But what amazed me was the whole time he chain smoked from the walk out of the hotel into the bus, on the bus, back off the bus. He was just constantly lighting up cigarettes and taking these massive drags. And I couldn't believe what shape he was in for a guy who smoked as much as he did at the time, you know? And he was just a real good guy to us as kids. Again, he's another guy who left an impression. 2 times I watched. My dream fight was him and Fatiyu, and both times. Once I was down in New Haven, and Nicky challenged him, threw his gloves off, and Bob skated away, and Nicky got it unsportsmanlike. And he did the same thing to Fatiyu in Calgary. Nicky hit him pretty hard, threw his gloves off, squared off, and Bob skated away and just left Nicky standing there twice. And I always wanted to see that fight, and it never took place. You got any good Nick Fatiyu stories?
One thing I'd say in Probert's, like, he to me, he's like at the top of the food chain because he was a 29 goal scorer too. You know what I mean? And it's
Right.
a lot different when you're not playing a regular shift and all you're doing is getting prepared to go out and fight somebody or do something, you know, than when you're playing a regular shift and, you know, you got to pay attention to how you're conditioning and if you're tired and, you know, when it is. Because I mean, I would be planning sometimes when I was going to do something, if I was going to do it at the beginning of a shift or the end of a shift. And, but guys like, and I know Ben mentioned that in his, you know, he had to, you know, he was playing a regular shift. And so, you know, it was a lot different depending on when he, and back then, not everybody trained like, they didn't train like they do now, you know.
Right.
Now everybody's in shape and everybody understands, you know, everything that you got to do to, you know, to put yourself in the best position to be.
What's amazing about Ben is the fact that he was a first-round pick, ran the power play for the Philadelphia Flyers, and was best penalty killer on the team. You know, people just remember Ben as being a really monster tough guy. Ben Wilson was one talented athlete, man. I mean, if he played today, the money he'd be a $10 million a year defenseman.
Oh yeah, easy. Yeah. I mean, and that's the difference now. Like, to me, you know, nowadays, like I said, I remember getting in the elevator with the Flyers when I was there with them, when I was Hershey. And, you know, the draft picks coming in, they were all 6'4", 6'5", and these guys were huge. And I do remember thinking, man, I feel so short in here. But yeah, the level of where the game was going back then compared to now, guys like Ben Wilson that, you know, that were really good players, that were really tough, they would just rule, kind of like Wilson does now. Wilson kind of pretty much gets to do whatever he wants because, you know, there's not a lot of guys that can challenge him anymore.
Right.
Certainly guys that play a regular shift.
It's him and Reeves. I mean, to be honest, it's the 2 guys that have every liberty in the league right now. It's him and Ryan Reeves.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I think Wilson plays them. You know, like Wilson is making plays in the game, and I think anybody that fights Reeves knows that he's trying to hurt you too. You know, you can see when
Right.
guys when they miss their punches, some guys pull their punches back so fast. You know, I call it they just want to get the fight over. They just want to get it over and they want to survive. And you know, some guys are trying to punch through you, and they're you know the guys that are trying to hurt you in a fight versus the guys that just want to get it over with. That
Right.
Olivier is a guy that, you know, he's got a big follow through on his punch. You can tell
He's an MMA fighter on ice, that kid. He trains MMA all summer long. He's a tough kid. I mean, he beat the shit out of Rempe, and I love Rempe. Rempe wasn't ready for that guy at all. And Olivier's probably taken on every single tough guy in the league. And I've listened to a bunch of other shows where they talk about how he trains also with Cam Janssens during the summer. He trains MMA. He's a tough kid.
Well, but that's what I talk about. You know, you can't go up against guys like Olivier. You have to. I mean, if you do that, you got to be ready to get him tied up, and he can switch hands. So it's hard for young guys, no matter how tough you are, to come in because Remke, you know, and I don't know how many fights he had in the American League, but again, you know, they start suspending him after 10 fights. So
Right.
by the time you go fight a guy like Olivier, who's been doing it for, you know, 7 or 8 years now between pro, like I tried to get him in Allen when he went to Milwaukee. I was calling him when he was in the Quebec League. And, you know, back in those days, I didn't know who was going to sign a contract and who wasn't. But I'm like, this guy's tough and he can play. But it's hard to fight those guys if you don't have a lot of fights under your belt because most guys panic. And one of the things I try to tell guys is you don't want to tie them up when they're throwing You gotta try to tie them up when they're bringing their arm back, not when they're bringing them forward. But you got to get in close to do that and understand how to protect your head. And like I said, you only learn that from experience.
Right. You know, people don't realize that about Rempe is the kid only had 2 fights in juniors, and his first year in the AHL, I think he had 6. He had total 8 fights coming into the NHL before he had that fight with Martinson.
So it's amazing that he's, you know, it's, like I said, it's a very rare part of it. He's big and he's strong, you know, but it's pretty rare when you can go up against established tough guys and you don't have those fights under your belt so that you don't panic. But that's one of the reasons he takes too many punches that he doesn't have to take. With his arm and reach, he should be able to tie guys up a little bit more. And, you know, I saw him working with, you know, an ex-fighter.
George LaRock.
Yeah, and he was grabbing by the front of the jersey. And, you know, if he's fighting a guy that he can hold him out, that's okay. But, again, to me, you tie up the strong arm and make them go with their weak hand against your strong hand. And if they don't want – I tried to do that to Ben Wilson, but he's pretty smart, and he didn't want to switch hands. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care if he doesn't – you know, with someone like me, he just doesn't really want to get hurt. He doesn't – you know, I'm not playing very much. I've been called up, and you know what I mean? He's an established guy, so he just doesn't – they put him out there. They knew I was coming out to do something, so he didn't pulled off. I think it was another tough defenseman, but he put Ben out because he knew Ben, you know, like I said, he's not trying to beat me up. He just doesn't really want to deal with it, but I kind of forced his hand, and he just doesn't want to get beat. And I was hoping he would switch hands, but he's too smart for that.
So in 1986, you're called up to the Detroit Red Wings. You play 10 NHL games. You got a goal. You got an assist. You got 84 total PIMs. Tell me about the first goal in the NHL career. How special is that to you?
Yeah, it's funny. I scored in my first game on my first shift. So I think it was my first shift. No, it wasn't. But what had happened is I had gone to hit Gretzky, and I was joking with my buddies after. Gretzky was coming around the back of the net, and I was on the point, covering my point, and he's coming around the back of the net. And remember, I was never drafted, never planned on playing in the NHL, and now I'm playing in the NHL. And I thought, well, this might be my only game. And I saw Gretzky, and I said, I'm going to get him. I'm going to hit him, and that'll be my claim to fame to my buddies back home. I hit Gretzky. So Rick Green trips him just as I come in, but they could see I was trying to hit him. And, you know, I was trying to hit him hard. And so my next shift out, they put McSorley out against me. And we're jousting off the face-off, and I know McSorley has got really good stamina. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to cruise for a little bit, and I'm going to fight him about 30 seconds into the shift. And I score right off the face-off. We dump it in, and I score. And now we're up 3-1 in the first period. And so every time I came out after that, they either put Gretzky's line out against me or Messier's line. And I'm literally, you know, I'm sprinting to just catch him on the back check. And then they benched me in the third period. I had the game winner. But I remember the coach telling me, he goes, yeah, they're just trying to match those guys up, so I'm gonna keep you on the bench. And I was like, okay, I'm tired of trying to catch those guys, so that's all right with me.
You still have the puck?
I do have it. They put it on a plaque, and I only have 2 pucks. So I have my first goal in Montreal and my first goal in Detroit. But I would have finished with 600 penalty minutes and 8 goals and 8 assists, and I would have been, I think, because I think it was +3. My plus minus would have been good. It would have been good for $1 million now.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because I kind of looked at myself like a Chris Nyland of the AAA. You know, like I was a regular shift, and I would play on some teams. I would play on the first line. I was on some teams when I was just with another fighter on the fourth line, and you know, you didn't get many points that way. But yeah, it was. I got a little sidetracked of where I was at on that point, but.
We were talking about your first goal, and then you were saying how you wanted to be.
Yeah, so that was it was pretty cool to get called
$1 million man.
and because I had gone to camp without a contract, and I had a couple of fights with Cemento. I actually had 3 fights in one game, and I cut them open a few times. And so they signed me to a contract after that, and so I had a pretty good run. But then I hurt my neck, and I was out for 3 months. Unfortunately, I hurt my neck in a fight in the NHL, and I didn't say anything. And I went down and I herniated a disc again. And I took a slap shot in practice, and it moved just enough to put pressure on the nerve. And I couldn't play for like 2.5 months.
Oof,
and then they didn't want to bring me back up because of my injury. So.
All right, so I have to ask you a question. I just spent last weekend hanging out with this guy. One of my favorite people to talk to, Frank Beaton. You got any good Frank Beaton stories?
Yeah. Frank. So, if you saw him in his heyday, he only weighed like 180 pounds, but his muscles were like, they looked like that steel cord, that thick cable steel,
the elevator cable.
Like I've never seen. Like he was just ripped, and when he got shot in the parking lot, I'd heard about a boxer this named Halpern that was built just like that. He'd been shot, and the muscles didn't penetrate the bullets didn't penetrate through his muscles. And I was just thinking the same thing with Beater, that with his build is probably what saved his life. But yeah, he was one of the meanest looking guys. When he would lose his temper, I have a line that if that's your mean look, you better get a new one. And nobody ever accused Beater of that. When he had that look, like he looked like the devil himself. One time he got in a fight with this guy named Mike Moore, and this was in Birmingham, and all of a sudden we see them both take off. They're getting thrown out of the game, and they both start running underneath. We see him leave, and we get back there, and they're both going at it with their sticks on the cement in the on the hobby, in the lobby, by the locker room stuff. Anyway, but Peter was older then, so he didn't have as many fights back then. But I remember him getting into it with the coach. Our morning skates were like an hour long, and I remember him getting into the coach about that. But he's a legend.
He still looks amazing. Him and his wife look like they're 30 years old, both of them. He still has that stare. I'll tell you that right now. He can stare you down, and he's just a nice guy. But I'll tell you a compliment that Frank threw you. I asked this question. I'm going to ask it to you also. I ask every guy, you're walking into a bar. There's 20 guys in a bar, and shit's going to go down. It's going to get real. You only can pick 2 guys. Who do you bring with you? And Frank answered instantaneously, Steve Martinson and Nick Fatine.
Well, that's funny because, George McPhee was telling me that they had a psychologist when he was with the Rangers. And one of the things that they would talk about is, if you're getting ready for a big game, it's going to be a physical game, imagine some things. And George told me that he would imagine that I was going to be out there, because I kind of had the reputation that I would go, take on the toughest guy. And I remember because, I was telling you, I did a lot of street fights. So we had a game with Quebec, and it was in training camp, and Quebec had Kimball was a rookie, and there had been all these articles about how he was the toughest guy in their team now. And so I was in Sherbrooke, and they called me up after the game to play the last preseason game in Quebec City. And it's before the game, and they've called up all their tough guys from wherever it was. I can't remember where their farm team was. So it's before the game, and Cordic he's saying to me, he goes, I don't know why they called all these guys up. And this is ridiculous. It's the last game of the year, the last preseason game. And then he shows me his hand. He's got a little nick in his hand. And he goes, yeah. He goes, you're going to have to take center stage tonight. My hand's a little sore. And finally, and then in warm-ups on the anthem, we're standing next to each other on the bench. And he brings it up again. I said, hey, John, it's a hockey game, man. You only got to fight one guy at a time, and you only got to fight 3 times. So let's just go, stop worrying about it. But that's what happened to a lot of players. They think about fighting way too much.
Right. Did you ever read John's book?
What's that?
Did you ever read John Cordic's book?
I didn't.
It's the best sports book I've ever read in my life, and I've probably put away 500 books. the emotional stress that John was under because his father literally hated him for fighting. Like he talks about how his father would tell him you're an embarrassment to the family and real harsh stuff like that. And I think honestly that was John's major reason for spiraling the way he did. If you read the book, it's really, I mean, it's a great read if you get a chance to read it.
Well, you know, like my parents didn't want me to fight, and my parents only came to 2 of my games, you know, live when I was playing pro. But they didn't like me fighting, and so I mean I can understand that. But my dad never told me I was, you know, I mean that would put a lot of pressure on, you know, on John and you know, there's a lot of things. One of the things that I look at, what I think the league is healthier now, is a lot of players, you know, even though you like to fight, you always hear it's the thinking about it. And some players don't learn how to handle, you know, not thinking about it. And if they can't do that, then they turn to other things at night to get them to sleep. But the other thing that I used to think about with guys is the retribution. So nowadays, the league handles virtually, you know, there's not as much stuff that you have to go back and answer the bell for. There are still things, but it's not like it used to be. It used to be the suspensions were minimal and everything was doled out by the players. And, you know, when you're in that position, I kind of look at it like like the cartels is you have to be willing to do worse than the other people to get it to stop. And that's one of the things that I learned. If you were willing to go a little bit further than the other guy, it would put an end to it. And every time and I'm talking about if somebody crossed the line, you know, we always talk about that code. If you broke the code, then you're going to get something worse. And every time I did that, it would end it. You know what I mean? Because they knew if they came back to me with something worse than that, they wondered like what was going to happen next. So, but nowadays, all that would be exposed on video, and you'd be suspended for indefinitely. So the game is much healthier now.
You'd step on the bench and you get suspended. But I got a story that's going to make you laugh. I hope I got a John Cordic story. So John Cordic only played 8 games for the Newmarket Saints in 1991. He was sent down. And I'm sure you're going to remember this, the Binghamton Arena in Binghamton, New York. He comes down to play against the Binghamton Rangers, and my friend Lou Goldman and I, we would pile in a car on a Friday, get to see the Rangers play Friday, Saturday, and the Sunday afternoon, 3 and 3 days, and then we drive back to Jersey and go to work. So we go up because Cordic is going to play against a team that's got Domi, they've got Poshek, they got Dennis Fayal. It's probably one of the toughest teams that Binghamton ever seen. And Cordic is in pregame warmups, doesn't dress. And we're like, what the fuck, man? You know, like, what happened to him? So the game is over, and the head coach, Frank Azzalone, and I believe Brophy may have been the general manager at the time of Toronto. I'm trying to remember who the GM was, but he was at the game, and they can't find him. He's nowhere to be found. Now, Binghamton was kind of famous because they had 3 puck bunnies that would walk around the concourse and try to pick up the visiting team's extra players every game. 1 was really fat, 2 were really good looking. So they can't find Cordic. And they're flipping out, and Petey Fiorentino is out talking to the coach of Newmarket, and now it's become a concern. Nobody can find John Cordic. So all of a sudden you hear the coach go, well, that's fucking it. Everybody get on the fucking bench. Fuck him, we're leaving. And out from behind a dumpster in the parking lot comes John Cordic, zipping up his pants, walking over, go, you guys looking for me? And the 3 girls come out from behind the dumpster with him. And both teams are now underneath the Binghamton Arena just laughing hysterical. And he walks on the bench, and he never dressed again for Newmarket. And I believe he was sent to Washington probably within a day or 2 of that happening.
Well, did they ever find out why he didn't play?
No, never mentioned.
Yeah, he probably said he was hurt. I don't know. I mean, that's what happened in that game that I was with him, and I got to be careful what I say because he's not here.
Of course.
Yeah, so
of course. It was just funny because he's banging 3 broads in a dumpster, you know, which was kind of funny.
Yeah, the old days.
Yeah, it was a little crazy, but so tell me, you get to Montreal, obviously the most historic city in hockey history. You got a bunch of games in. You played, 44 games, 60 games. What's it like playing in that city, putting that sweater on? I mean, does that justify what you did in all of those years in the minors to get there?
Yeah, I mean, they treat you so well too. I mean, we would nowadays everybody does it, but we would go out to eat every night in the playoffs. They did everything together, and the group of guys on the team. I mean, I remember, Kelly was, because you had the English guys and the French guys, but everybody got along. But Larry Robinson was, I still talk to Larry when I got into coaching. Larry was coaching the Kings, and I said, "Hey, Larry, I'm coaching now. Can we sit down?" And Rick Green and him and I sat down, and that's where I set up my systems for my first year. After sitting down, because I never was planning on coaching. So yeah, it was a great group of guys, and we went to the finals. With Calgary and lost. I think it was in 6 games. It was tough, but it was a great team. And then, I thought they made a mistake. They traded away. Pat Burns didn't do anything without talking to Greeny, Larry, and Daney. They would always be kind of conferring. And then I think kind of what happened is the team had a lot of success, and so he didn't want those guys around and wanted to call all the shots himself. And they traded them all. And, instead of saying those guys are going to be, really hard to replace, their leadership, they said, oh, yeah, they're older guys now, and we got these young guys. And then the team wasn't any nearly as good as it was the year before. But, walking into that locker room, meeting guys like Yvonne Cornway, I remember watching him play when I was a kid. It was pretty cool because it was the old Forum, with the old locker room. So,
Right.
It was
sacred ground.
Great time of my life.
That's who's who on that team too. Oh my God! I mean, I'm looking at the roster on this team. Obviously you have Hershey, you have Corson, you have Courtnall, Carbonneau, and it is a really big mix of the old and young on that team at that time. So it was definitely a point where they were definitely trying to get younger in that organization for sure.
Well, we were so deep. Like when I would play in a line with Stephane Richer and Shane Corson. And then my next year, Naslin would drive them crazy because they would sit out Naslin a lot of times when I would play. The team was so deep, and he was the leading scorer the year before. So it was a pretty good team. It was tough it was hard to get ice time.
I could see why.
It was a lot of fun.
What was your favorite arena to play in the NHL where you played, like a visiting team? What was your favorite place to go into?
I thought Chicago was pretty cool, but like for me, it was every rink was my favorite. Minnesota it was tough going back to Minnesota because back then, people stopped going to the games, and we would go play Minnesota and there'd be like 10,000 people there, and that's being my hometown, that was tough. But I thought. One thing, I'll be taking to my grave. When I fought Semenko 3 times, Joe Louis, it was a preseason game, but it was packed. There was like 20,000 people, and that was the biggest game where the most people I had ever played in. And it was a lot of fun playing in that game and kind of making a name for myself as, it's coming up from the American League.
As a Ranger fan, I have to owe you a big thank you, and I think he should give you a thank you at some point in life. Was Terry Kartner? And the reason I say that is you had a preseason game at Madison Square Garden where I happened to be at, and I was there watching the game. You guys had two just absolute. The first one was an absolute war, and the second one was in the corner. It was over a little faster. You ended up on top. But the reason I say that is. The commentary on the Rangers side that night mentions the New York Rangers have some hesitation about Terry Kartner and his aggression and his inability to play tough hockey. And it was Sal Red Light Messina, the announcer, and he says, this scrap will go a long way with impressing general manager Phil Esposito. Terry makes the team, and they interview Phil Esposito at like the first game of the regular season, and he mentions Terry Kartner, who showed us that he could play physical hockey after his scraps with Steve Martinson in the preseason, is what Terry made the team. And that's been very interesting for me, is that, basically if he didn't have that scrap, he doesn't make the Rangers as a rookie that year.
On top of that, I think if he didn't have that scrap, he was going to get traded to the Flyers. I heard later that the Flyers had a deal for him. and then it all fell apart. But now, so that was I had herniated my disc in my neck the year before, and when I had the 400 penalty minutes, I had surgery in April, and I actually played 3 games. If you can believe it, they cleared me after 4 weeks, and I had a nerve damage in my right side.
Oof.
I couldn't do a push-up with my right arm. I'd lost all the muscle in my chest and my right tricep. So in that fight, I would throw one punch and my arm would just kind of sit there. And I'd broken my cheekbone in a fight with Brown that week. And I didn't know it at the time. I didn't find out until I had it x-rayed a year later. I had my eyes swelled shut, and they thought, well, they had an x-ray, and they said, well, you have a fracture. And I said, well, it doesn't even hurt. And they said, oh, they found out it was an old fracture. So when I would throw a punch, so then I went to the Flyers doctor, and I said, hey, I'm not fighting the way I used to fight. My arm's not automatically coming back. I kind of have to think about it. And they said, well, you had surgery in April, and it's going to take at least a year for your nerves to heal, for you to get your right arm to work the way it's supposed to. And I'm like, well, it would have been nice if somebody would have told me that. I maybe would have practiced fighting left-handed. So,
That's crazy.
Terry, I'm glad that, Carter was, because I met him, I knew him from the Rangers camp, I think the year before. I met him in camp, and so, I knew him, but not as a friend, but I knew he was a good kid.
Right.
Hey, so I'm glad to help his career.
Farm boy tough, like what you said earlier. Yeah. He's the guy who exampled that. You mentioned Dave Brown. Was that fight in training camp with the Flyers?
Yeah, I was in training camp. So, I kind of had a thing where I went in and, if you're going to take on the tough guy, you've got to stand back and throw him. So I was throwing my right to his left, and same thing. I was throwing one to his two, and I remember my cheekbone feeling kind of squished. And I was lucky because I had a bunch more fights in training camp, and I never got hit in that cheekbone. It healed up, and I was able to but I could have really damaged it because it was the next year when I got in a fight with Semenko. He caught me in the third fight with one in the eye, and so they made me x-ray my eye, and I said it doesn't hurt, and that's when I found out. But I broke my back and didn't know for years later, so I broke a lot of stuff over the years, so I wasn't surprised.
I'll tell you, this afternoon I was at work, and I pulled up some of your stats, and I was going through some stuff on you to research, and one of the pictures comes up is you did an interview in Montreal, and you're wearing a white helmet, and you're doing this interview with a reporter, and one of the ladies at work walks by and goes, "Is that a fashion shoot?" And I go, "What?" And she goes, "That guy's hot." And I just started laughing. She saw your picture with the Canadiens in practice, and she's like, "That's a really good looking hockey player." I got a kick out of that. I was like, I should still see
I didn't get very many cuts until my last year. I got cut 6 times, and it was so bad. I got between my eyes. I got hit with a stick twice. The guy speared me. I went to fight a guy, and a goalie speared me right in the face.
Oh.
I was picking up my gloves, and then I got high stick. Salo high stick me. I knocked him down on the way down. He hit me with the end of a stick. But it was so bad. I took a backhand once, and the puck came up and hit the defensive stick and came back and hit me in the face. I got a puck in the face. So I would have been, if I would have retired 1 year earlier, I would have had a lot less scars. But
so you mentioned
you know how they always talk about scars. You have enough character. She told me, or scars had character. She said, "Yeah, you got enough character now. You don't need any more."
That's enough. You don't need any more. The one hockey player I say always tell the story is that when he looked like an innocent young kid, and by the time he retired, he looked like he was a psychotic axe murderer, is Adam Graves. Adam came to the New York Rangers. He didn't have a mark on his face, and by the time he retired, he looked like he took a chainsaw to his mouth.
Yeah, and I played with Adam too when he was in Adirondack there when I was there for a little bit. I think he was a first rounder to Detroit. Actually, we played on the line together, so I think we roomed together for a little bit, but. Yeah, that's one of the things when I learned to tie guys up, because I saw guys' faces. Like, I have all my teeth, but I wore a mouth guard, and I would tell guys, no heavyweight fighter, no pro fighters get into a ring without a mouth guard on. You can take a punch better. So right. I chipped my tooth in a fight in 9th grade and made it through my career with all my teeth. And I broke my nose in a car accident I went through a couple windshields back when I was like 17,
Oof.
18. But I got a hard head, so I was pretty lucky. I got out of the game without too much.
Well, that's
I
good to
broke a
hear.
lot of
Well,
stuff.
we're gonna do a couple speed round. Well, I had one last question. I know I'm keeping you a long time today. I wanted to ask a question. In Ranger camp, do you have any scraps with anybody notable back then?
Well,
Did
when you
Sandy get any
mentioned Nick
video from you?
so um, I'm thinking I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fight Nick. If we get an opportunity, if I get an opportunity, I'm going to fight Nick. Because that's the only way. I've been in the Central League the year before, and I don't think a lot of people in the Rangers knew me. So I'm sitting at breakfast by myself, and who sits down with me is Nick. And Nick doesn't know me. He sits down with me and ends up buying my breakfast and talking to me for an hour and talking to me about all these things. I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy's just a nice guy. And I did the year when I fought Brown, like I'd been to his house a couple of times because I was staying up. Brian Propp let me stay at his place. So, and Daryl Stanley played with us in Hershey a little bit. So, Brownie, when I first came out to fight him, he wouldn't fight me. And it wasn't that he was afraid. He's like, Marty, I'm not fighting you. And then a guy high sticked me, and I dropped him, and he turned out to be he was a guy from a college. Because back then we didn't know who was.
Right.
The guy high sticked me. I guess he high sticked me by accident, and I cut him. And then Brownie was like, okay. And then he was like, okay, you can't be punching guys on my team. And the kid was an invite from Keenan's college team. The kid was he brought him to camp so he would have the experience. The kid was going to be a dentist. And here he gets his eyes slashed, punched open, and the tough training camp. But he's got that memory as the rest of his life.
He's got character now, as your wife
He's got
says.
a little character. He's got a good story.
So you never went with Nicky?
No. So, and then we never, we were on the practice one time, but that was the only time I never played against him. So,
okay.
He's one of those guys. He's a nice guy. He's just trying to help you out, and, show you the ropes a little bit.
Another guy who's always been
about not eating a big breakfast before you weigh in, and because I guess he had to worry about it. So I never had to worry about my weight, so I was like, it'll be okay for me.
He was always good to us fans in New York, and he's still great. He's injured. He got hurt pretty bad. I read online that he had fallen and broken his leg pretty severely right before Thanksgiving. So, hoping he's doing okay. Like I said, a couple rapid fire questions. You're walking into that bar. Who are the two guys you bring with you to have your back?
Ooh. Well, so McPhee is a guy that few guys fight like that guy. I mean, he was a good. I mean, George is a pretty good street fighter too. I've seen George in a couple of fights off the ice, and Beater would be a guy that certainly would, and I know Beater's been in a few street fights because it's completely different.
Right.
You got to have eyes on all over. You got to be paying attention because you don't want to go down. And those would be a couple of guys that, but I played with a lot of. Paul Tannerdini would be another guy that people don't know, but I was lucky. I played with a lot of guys that would be right there with you. We had one fight. I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. One of our guys got jumped by a football player, and they had a. It was after we lost in Adirondack in the playoffs. So one of our guys apparently is dating one of the football player's ex-girlfriends, and it's like a semi-pro team in Glens Falls. And the guy grabs our guy and beats him up, and we find out about it. And so we go to that bar, and I'm asking who's who, and ask for the guy, and I let him have it. I'm telling you, it was just like the Old West. Because it's a bunch of football players against a bunch of hockey players. And it was so when you brought up that 20, I've been in that situation. Chris King was in there, and Chris King was knocking some people around, but it was
tough guy, tough kid, Chris King.
Pretty chaotic. So
Chris King and Troy Millette came to the New York Rangers under Neil Smith, and they gave some respect to a team that got fucking pushed around for years. Chris King's got nothing but respect in my book. He never turned anybody down, fought every single heavyweight there was in the league. Yeah, he's a guy I respect a ton, Chris King.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys, but yeah, Chris was a good guy. He's a funny guy too off the ice. He's a smart ass.
Was it the ears? Was it those big ears?
Well, I don't. He probably got teased a little bit as a kid, so he was used to giving it back.
That's funny. Favorite pregame meal?
It's always chicken and spaghetti. Hamburger and chicken and spaghetti.
That's awesome. Do you have your Red Wing and your Canadian jerseys?
I don't have a Red Wing one. I have a Canadiens one. Over the years, in San Diego, so they had a concert and they broke into a storage area that I had some of my stuff. So there's a fan. I've seen a fan wearing one of my I had a Montreal jersey that I had elastic put in the sleeves. So I had one year I got tired of guys tying me up. So I put a Velcro strap in my jersey in the American League. So when you grabbed it, my whole arm would open up. And then they outlawed that.
Right.
So if you look at Dave Brown where on his left arm, he had his jersey just skin tight.
Yeah, he had the offensive lineman jersey.
Yeah, so you couldn't grab it. And I had elastic in my sleeve so you couldn't see it because they sewed it all up with the striping and everything. But a fan, and that was stolen from me, and I know the guy that's got it. It was kind of tough for me to say, hey, give that back to me. It was stolen from me. But
that's bullshit. You should have that jersey back. If that fan listens to the interview, return the fucking jersey. That's a memory for this poor guy. Real quick, another Minnesota native, a guy who played with Montreal for a little bit, really good friend of mine. Any runnings? Kent Carlson.
No.
Any good Kent?
No, I never. I know who he is, but no, I never played against Kent.
Okay. Yeah, he was another guy who came up. He had some back injuries, but man, what a rookie year in Montreal. He gave it to Paul Holmgren like nobody ever did before.
Yeah, I think he was a guy that was kind of a sleeper. Nobody knew that he could do it.
Yeah, another college kid. Well, let me ask you, where can the fans find you now? You're coaching in Atlanta. I'm coming to a game. I'm going to message you when I'm coming.
Athens, Georgia. So
right.
Yeah, I mean, we've got we have the same kind of team that I've had for years. We've got some physical guys and some skill. We play we play an offensive heavy game, and I like the way the Panthers played. I messaged Berube when St. Louis went on and said, "Hey, great job bringing back macho hockey." And I love it when the top guys, top players are hard to play against, and finishing their checks. So it was great to see the Panthers win with the style that they play too.
So who's your main rival down there so I can pick up some tickets and come to that game and see a good old-fashioned hockey game?
Columbus, we always have scrappy games. They're close games. And, it's my first year here, and it's a brand-new team. So, but Columbus is entertaining games.
Awesome. I'm going to have to come and check it out. So, Steve, anytime you want to jump on, you let me know. If you got anybody, any former teammates you're close with, you want to turn them on to the show, please let me know that. Also, we're always looking to get some fresh faces. I do have Stan Jonathan lined up. I will be doing a couple different interviews coming up in the future, but I just want to say thank you for you joining us, and I'm sorry about the other day. We've had some crazy storms here in Nashville. Right now, it's like 7 degrees outside and ice everywhere still, so we're not really getting the best of weather. So thank you for being patient with us and having the delay coming on.
All right, Ricky, I enjoy it. I enjoy talking to you, and we'll catch up. We're looking forward to hearing from Eddie Johnstone, too.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.